In the summer of 1943, German fighter pilots still believed they understood the American air threat. For months, they had battled formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-20 liberators over occupied Europe. These massive bombers crossed the continent in daylight, escorted only part of the way by Allied fighters before continuing alone into German airspace. The Luftwaffe had developed effective tactics for attacking them. Fighters concentrated on frontal assaults, firing powerful cannon into the bombers before breaking away. Although the Americans inflicted losses in return, Germany's experienced pilots remained confident that disciplined attacks could eventually force the United States Army Air Forces to abandon daylight bombing. Then another American fighter began appearing in greater numbers. At first glance, it hardly looked like an aircraft capable of changing the air war. It was enormous. The fuselage appeared unusually bulky. Its nose seemed far too long. The wings looked thick compared to sleek European fighters. Even experienced German pilots sometimes joked that the new American aircraft resembled a flying milk bottle more than a fighter. Many believed its size would make it slow and clumsy. They could not have been more mistaken. The aircraft was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. American pilots quickly gave it a nickname that perfectly matched its appearance: the Chuck, despite its awkward-looking profile. The P-47 represented one of the most advanced engineering achievements of the Second World War. Its size existed for a reason. Hidden behind the large propeller sat the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine capable of producing more than 2,000 horsepower. It ranked among the most powerful aircraft engines built anywhere in the world during the war. Yet even this massive engine did not explain the aircraft's unusual dimensions. Behind the cockpit stretched an intricate network of ducts leading toward perhaps the Thunderbolt's greatest technological advantage: the turbo-supercharger. Unlike many contemporary fighters, which relied only upon engine-driven superchargers, the P-47 used exhaust gases to power a separate turbine mounted deep within the rear fuselage. This complicated system compressed incoming air before delivering it back to the engine. The result transformed the aircraft's performance at high altitude. Where many fighters gradually lost power while climbing, the Thunderbolt remained remarkably strong. American engineers had designed the aircraft specifically for combat high above Europe, where heavy bombers conducted their missions. At those altitudes, the P-47 became exceptionally dangerous. German intelligence recognized the aircraft's technical sophistication. Captured reports described unusually high speed during dives. Pilots reported impressive acceleration above 20,000 feet. Its 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns delivered tremendous firepower. Each wing carried 4 heavy machine guns fed by hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Together, they produced a devastating stream of bullets capable of tearing apart enemy aircraft within seconds. The Thunderbolt sacrificed nothing in terms of offensive capability. Yet it was not the guns that soon earned the respect of the Luftwaffe. It was something far less expected: its ability to survive. The first encounters occurred during bomber escort missions. American Thunderbolts accompanied heavy bombers toward occupied Europe before turning back as fuel limitations required. At this stage of the war, the P-47 lacked the range necessary to escort bombers all the way to Berlin. German commanders understood this weakness. They frequently waited until American fighters departed before launching major attacks against unescorted bomber formations. Even so, every encounter with Thunderbolts left an impression. German pilots discovered that damaging one proved far more difficult than anticipated. The aircraft seemed capable of absorbing extraordinary punishment, unlike liquid-cooled inline engines used by fighters such as the P-51 Mustang, the British Spitfire, the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, or the Focke-Wulf Fw 190. The Thunderbolt relied upon a large air-cooled radial engine. This difference mattered enormously during combat. Liquid-cooled engines depended upon vulnerable cooling systems. A single bullet piercing a radiator could cause coolant to escape rapidly within minutes. Overheating forced the pilot to land or abandon the aircraft. Radial engines eliminated their weakness, even after sustaining multiple hits. They often continued operating. German fighter pilots quickly noticed the difference. Thunderbolts returned home with cylinders shot away, oil streamed across windscreens. Cowling panels hung loose. Propellers bore bullet holes. Yet many of these aircraft somehow remained airborne. Ground crews at English airfields grew accustomed to astonishing sights. Aircraft landed missing large sections of wing. Control surfaces appeared shredded. Entire rows of bullet holes covered the fuselage. Maintenance personnel frequently wondered how the pilot had survived. The answer usually involved the Thunderbolt's exceptional structural strength. Republic Aviation had built the fighter to withstand tremendous stress. Its heavy airframe, often criticized for adding weight, proved remarkably durable under combat conditions. Massive wing spars resisted battle damage. The robust landing gear tolerated rough airfields. The thick fuselage protected internal systems more effectively than many lighter fighters. American pilots gradually developed enormous confidence in their aircraft. They believed the Thunderbolt could bring them home under circumstances that would destroy almost any other fighter. Stories spread rapidly throughout fighter groups. One pilot returned after colliding with a German aircraft during combat. Another landed safely despite losing much of his tail. Several reached England with damaged engines producing only a fraction of normal power. Perhaps most remarkable were aircraft recovering from anti-aircraft fire, flying alongside bomber formations. Exposed Thunderbolts to hundreds of German flak batteries. Black bursts surrounded escort fighters almost continuously near major industrial targets. Fragments tore through wings and fuselages. Yet many Thunderbolts survived. German anti-aircraft crews expressed frustration. Aircraft clearly struck multiple times, frequently continued flying. The nickname jerk gradually acquired another meaning. Some pilots compared it to a massive steel container absorbing punishment that would cripple more delicate machines. The Luftwaffe soon learned another important lesson. Never underestimate the Thunderbolt in a dive. Although German fighters generally climbed more rapidly and turned more tightly than the heavy American aircraft, the P-47 possessed extraordinary diving performance. Its great weight became an advantage when an American pilot pushed the nose downward. Gravity transformed the Thunderbolt into one of the fastest aircraft in the sky. Acceleration became phenomenal. Several German pilots attempting pursuit discovered they simply could not catch a diving P-47. Others exceeded safe speed limits while trying. Compressibility effects complicated high-speed dives for many wartime fighters. Pilots approaching extreme speeds sometimes found their controls becoming dangerously stiff. Recovery demanded exceptional skill. American engineers devoted considerable effort toward improving the Thunderbolt's handling under these conditions. Experienced American pilots learned to exploit this advantage whenever combat turned unfavorable. Rather than attempting prolonged turning battles against lighter opponents, they often escaped through steep dives impossible for many German fighters to match safely. This tactic frustrated Luftwaffe pilots. A successful attack frequently ended with the Thunderbolt disappearing rapidly toward lower altitudes. German reports increasingly described the aircraft as difficult to finish off. If the initial attack failed, opportunities quickly vanished. American pilot training emphasized these strengths. New Thunderbolt pilots learned not to imitate enemy tactics. The P-47 would never equal a Spitfire in sustained turning combat, nor could it match the lightweight agility of early Bf-109 variants. Instead, instructors emphasized energy fighting, maintain speed, use altitude, attack aggressively, then climb or dive away before the enemy could respond effectively. This style perfectly suited the aircraft. Powerful engines restored altitude quickly. High diving speed allowed rapid disengagement. Excellent stability improved gunnery during firing passes. The Thunderbolt excelled when flown according to its design philosophy. German veterans later admitted that inexperienced Luftwaffe pilots often underestimated the American fighter because of its appearance. Its size suggested sluggishness. Combat proved otherwise. One former FW-190 pilot recalled seeing Thunderbolts accelerate away after diving, leaving German fighters unable to close the distance. Another described firing what seemed an excellent burst only to watch the damaged American aircraft continue flying as though little had happened. Professional respect gradually replaced early contempt. Meanwhile, American industry continued increasing production. Factories delivered Thunderbolts in astonishing numbers. Every month brought additional aircraft to England. Replacement losses no longer posed serious concern. Fresh fighter groups arrived continuously. Ground crews developed efficient maintenance procedures. Spare parts flowed steadily across the Atlantic. Unlike Germany, whose aircraft industry increasingly struggled against Allied bombing, the United States expanded production almost without interruption. The Luftwaffe therefore faced not merely an effective fighter, but an entire industrial system capable of replacing losses rapidly. Still, German commanders remained cautiously optimistic. The Thunderbolt possessed one obvious weakness: range. Early models simply could not escort bombers deep into Germany. Once fuel levels dropped, American fighters turned back toward England. Only then did German interceptors attack the bombers in full strength. This pattern produced several costly American raids during 1943. The Schweinfurt Regensburg missions demonstrated the danger dramatically. Without continuous escort, bomber formations suffered heavy casualties from concentrated Luftwaffe attacks. German commanders interpreted these battles as evidence that the American escort problem remained unsolved. If fighters could not accompany bombers all the way to their targets, Germany might still preserve control of its own skies. For a time, that assessment appeared reasonable. American planners understood the problem perfectly. The Thunderbolt's combat performance impressed almost everyone who flew it. Its endurance remained insufficient. Engineers therefore searched urgently for solutions. Additional internal fuel capacity offered limited improvement. Attention soon shifted toward external drop tanks. The concept itself was not revolutionary. External tanks had existed before the war. The challenge involved producing reliable tanks that could be carried efficiently, jettisoned safely, and manufactured in enormous numbers. Progress came steadily as improved drop tanks entered service. Thunderbolt escort range expanded dramatically. Each increase carried profound strategic consequences. Bombers traveled farther beneath fighter protection. German interception opportunities shrank. The safe zone where Luftwaffe fighters previously assembled before attacking continued moving deeper into Germany. German commanders noticed the change immediately. Intelligence reports documented Thunderbolts appearing over areas previously considered beyond their operational reach. Escort fighters now remained with bomber formations significantly longer. American pilots displayed increasing confidence. The Luftwaffe found few opportunities to isolate unprotected bombers, although the P-51 Mustang would later become famous. For long-range escort missions, the Thunderbolt played a crucial role in extending Allied fighter coverage during this critical transitional period. The balance in the air had begun shifting. Another factor quietly favored the Americans' pilot experience. The United States rotated many veteran pilots into training positions after completing combat tours. These experienced men taught new aviators, using lessons learned in actual air combat over Europe. Knowledge spread rapidly. Tactics improved continuously. Mistakes made by one squadron rarely remained isolated for long. Germany increasingly faced the opposite situation. Experienced Luftwaffe aces remained at the front because replacements were desperately needed. Many flew until they were killed, wounded, or captured. Their experience disappeared with them. The training pipeline struggled to compensate. New German pilots often entered combat with fewer flying hours than their predecessors earlier in the war. Against growing numbers of well-trained Thunderbolt pilots, this imbalance steadily increased. By late 1943, Luftwaffe commanders had abandoned any notion that the P-47 represented a crude or inferior fighter. It had proven fast, heavily armed, extraordinarily durable, and increasingly capable of escorting bombers farther into occupied Europe. Nevertheless, German leaders still believed they possessed one significant advantage. The Luftwaffe remained fighting over its own territory, supported by radar stations, experienced ground controllers, and nearby airfields. If American bombers continued pushing deeper into Germany, the coming battles would test not only the Thunderbolt's ruggedness, but the Luftwaffe's entire defensive system. It would be in those skies, amid ever larger bomber formations and ever longer escort missions, that German pilots would discover the true reason the P-47 was becoming one of the most difficult fighters of the war to stop. By early 1944, the air war over Europe had entered an entirely new phase. The Luftwaffe still possessed talented pilots and formidable aircraft, but the nature of the conflict had changed dramatically. German fighter units were no longer choosing when and where to engage the enemy. Instead, they found themselves reacting to an almost constant stream of American bomber formations appearing over occupied Europe and Germany itself. Every major raid demanded an immediate response. Radar stations detected incoming aircraft hundreds of kilometers away. Telephones rang inside command bunkers, and fighter squadrons scrambled toward the sky. Increasingly, however, those bombers were no longer flying alone. The P-47 Thunderbolt had begun accompanying them farther than ever before. Improved drop tanks transformed the aircraft's operational range. American engineers refined both the tanks and the fuel management procedures used during long escort missions. Pilots learned precisely when to switch fuel systems, Ground crews perfected maintenance routines for external fuel equipment. What had once been a fighter limited to relatively short escort missions gradually evolved into an aircraft capable of remaining with bomber formations deep inside enemy territory. For German commanders, the consequences became immediately apparent. Interception plans developed during 1943 relied heavily upon timing. Fighter groups often avoided contact with American escorts, waiting instead until those escorts turned back because of fuel limitations. Only then would concentrated attacks strike the heavy bombers. The strategy had produced painful losses during earlier American raids. Now, the familiar pattern began disappearing. Thunderbolts remained with the bombers longer. German fighters found few opportunities to attack unescorted formations. Instead, they increasingly encountered aggressive American escort fighters waiting for them. The Luftwaffe still possessed excellent aircraft. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 remained fast, highly maneuverable, and heavily armed. The Focke-Wulf Fw 190 excelled at medium and low altitudes while carrying devastating cannon armament. Many German pilots had years of combat experience, stretching back to Poland, France, Britain, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. On paper, Germany still fielded one of the world's finest fighter forces. Reality proved far more complicated. Every interception now required fighting through a growing shield of thunderbolts before reaching the bombers themselves. American escort doctrine also evolved rapidly. Early in the war, escort fighters often remained close to the bomber formations they protected. The idea appeared logical: stay beside the bombers, drive away attacking fighters, maintain constant defensive coverage. Combat experience gradually demonstrated a better approach. Rather than waiting passively for German attacks, Thunderbolt pilots increasingly surged ahead of the bomber stream. They patrolled likely interception routes. They climbed above the formations. They positioned themselves between German airfields and the incoming bombers. Instead of merely reacting, they began hunting. The change caught many Luftwaffe units by surprise. German pilots climbing toward expected bomber formations suddenly found themselves attacked before even seeing the bombers. American fighters had already arrived. These engagements frequently disrupted carefully planned interceptions. German formations scattered while defending themselves. Altitude advantages disappeared, timing collapsed. Even when surviving fighters reached the bombers, they often arrived in smaller numbers and with less organization than originally intended. The Thunderbolt's performance suited these offensive escort tactics remarkably well. Its powerful engine allowed rapid climbs after diving attacks. Excellent high-altitude speed helped it intercept German fighters before they reached the bombers. Its 8 heavy machine guns delivered concentrated fire capable of destroying enemy aircraft quickly. American pilots rarely needed prolonged firing opportunities. A short burst from 8 Browning machine guns often proved sufficient. The Luftwaffe soon noticed another difficult characteristic. Thunderbolt pilots displayed increasing confidence. They no longer behaved like inexperienced escorts attempting simply to survive. Months of combat experience had refined American tactics. Squadron leaders emphasized teamwork. Flights supported one another. Radio discipline improved steadily. Veteran pilots passed practical knowledge directly to newcomers. Every major mission produced additional lessons. Unlike Germany, which struggled to replace experienced aviators, the United States continued expanding its training system. Fresh pilots arrived with increasingly sophisticated preparation. Although combat experience still mattered enormously, American training standards remained consistently high. Germany faced a different reality. Fuel shortages gradually reduced flying hours for trainee pilots. Aircraft losses forced instructors to conserve equipment. Operational demands accelerated graduation schedules. Young Luftwaffe pilots entered combat with significantly less experience than many veterans who had begun the war years earlier. The difference appeared clearly during large escort battles. Experienced German aces still achieved impressive successes. Newer pilots frequently struggled against disciplined American formations. The imbalance grew month by month. Another challenge emerged from the Thunderbolt itself. German fighter pilots quickly learned that attacking one American aircraft often exposed them to several others. Escort doctrine encouraged mutual support. While one Thunderbolt engaged an enemy fighter, others watched for additional threats. A German pilot concentrating upon a single target risked becoming the target himself. This forced increasingly cautious tactics. Aggressive attacks remained possible. They also became considerably more dangerous. Meanwhile, American industrial production reached astonishing levels. Every month brought hundreds of additional fighters across the Atlantic. Replacement aircraft arrived faster than the Luftwaffe could destroy them. Entire new fighter groups entered combat while existing units expanded their operational strength. German intelligence carefully monitored these developments. Reports consistently highlighted the same disturbing trend. American fighter numbers continued growing despite sustained combat losses. Destroying individual aircraft no longer significantly altered the overall balance. The industrial capacity supporting the Thunderbolt seemed almost limitless. Luftwaffe mechanics experienced the opposite problem. Spare parts became increasingly scarce. Factories suffered repeated bombing, transportation delays slowed deliveries, damaged aircraft accumulated around airfields awaiting repairs. Ground crews worked tirelessly, often cannibalizing badly damaged fighters to keep others operational. Their skill remained impressive, resources steadily declined, fuel became perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Germany still possessed aircraft. It still possessed pilots. Increasingly, it lacked sufficient aviation gasoline. The Allied bombing campaign against synthetic fuel plants gradually reduced production. Romanian oil supplies faced growing disruption. Every liter of aviation fuel became precious. Training flights were shortened. Practice exercises declined. Replacement pilots reached frontline squadrons with fewer hours in the cockpit than ever before. Veteran commanders recognized the danger immediately. Flying skill required constant practice. Without fuel, experience slowly disappeared. American Thunderbolt squadrons faced no comparable limitation. Pilots trained extensively. Formation flying, gunnery practice, navigation, radio procedures, emergency operations. Every aspect received regular attention. The contrast widened continuously. The Luftwaffe also confronted relentless pressure beyond aerial combat itself. American bombers increasingly targeted aircraft factories, engine plants, ball-bearing facilities, and transportation networks supporting fighter production. Every successful raid damaged Germany's ability to sustain the air war. Stopping those bombers therefore became absolutely essential. Yet, stopping them required fighting through ever larger formations of Thunderbolts. The relationship became painfully circular. Bombers weakened German aircraft production. Reduced production weakened fighter defenses. Weaker defenses allowed additional bombing. The cycle accelerated throughout 1944. The Thunderbolt played another increasingly important role. After escorting bombers toward their targets, many pilots still possessed ammunition and fuel for additional missions. Rather than simply returning home, they searched for targets of opportunity: railway locomotives, military trucks, radar installations, supply convoys, airfields. Anything supporting the German war effort became vulnerable. Initially, these attacks remained relatively limited. Experience quickly expanded their scope. Thunderbolt pilots discovered that the aircraft's rugged construction proved ideal for low-level operations. Heavy anti-aircraft fire frequently struck attacking fighters. The jerk often survived damage that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. Its radial engine again demonstrated remarkable resilience. Ground crews repeatedly repaired aircraft returning with holes through wings, fuselage, and engine cowling. Pilots gained confidence accordingly. Low-level attacks became increasingly aggressive. German transportation networks suffered constant harassment. A locomotive moving during daylight risked immediate attack. Truck drivers hid beneath trees whenever Allied fighters appeared overhead. Fuel convoys became particularly vulnerable. The irony deeply frustrated German commanders. The very shortages limiting Luftwaffe operations worsened because American fighters repeatedly destroyed fuel shipments before they reached operational units. Every successful strafing mission produced consequences extending far beyond immediate destruction. Fear itself slowed movement. Drivers traveled primarily at night. Convoys dispersed. Transportation efficiency declined. The Thunderbolt influenced German operations even when no shots were fired. Perhaps nowhere did this become clearer than around Luftwaffe airfields. American fighter sweeps increasingly targeted German bases. Aircraft attempting takeoff faced immediate danger. Landing proved equally hazardous. Ground crews worked beneath constant threat of surprise attack. Aircraft parked in the open became vulnerable. Maintenance schedules suffered repeated interruption. Pilots sometimes delayed flights until reports confirmed American fighters had departed. Operational tempo slowed. The psychological burden increased steadily. German veterans later described the feeling of uncertainty dominating everyday operations. Every engine start carried risk. Every training flight might attract enemy fighters. Every transfer between airfields required careful planning. The Thunderbolt had expanded the battlefield itself, and no longer confined to bomber escort duties. It threatened German air power wherever it operated. American commanders recognized this growing advantage. Escort fighters no longer served merely as defensive guardians. They had become offensive weapons in their own right. General Karl Spaatz and other senior air leaders increasingly emphasized destroying the Luftwaffe before the bombers reached their targets. The objective shifted subtly but profoundly: force German fighters into battle, destroy them in the air, attack them on the ground, wear down experienced pilots, eliminate aircraft faster than they could be replaced. The Thunderbolt became one of the principal instruments executing this strategy. By the spring of 1944, German fighter commanders understood that defeating the P-47 involved far more than winning individual dogfights. Even successful engagements produced only temporary relief because new Thunderbolts continued arriving in overwhelming numbers. Behind every squadron stood American factories operating day and night, training schools producing fresh pilots, maintenance crews repairing damaged aircraft, and a logistical system capable of sustaining operations across an entire continent. The Luftwaffe still possessed courageous pilots and technically excellent fighters, but it increasingly fought an opponent whose greatest strength extended far beyond the performance of a single aircraft. Soon after the Allied landings in Normandy, the Thunderbolt would reveal another capability that made it even more difficult for Germany to stop its devastating effectiveness against everything moving on the ground. June 6, 1944. Before dawn, thousands of Allied ships approached the coast of Normandy, while more than 11,000 aircraft filled the skies above the English Channel. For the soldiers climbing into landing craft, the greatest fear often came, not from the beaches ahead, but from what might happen if the Luftwaffe appeared in force. German air attacks had devastated invasions earlier in the war. At Crete, in North Africa, and on the Eastern Front, aircraft repeatedly disrupted troop movements and supply operations. Many Allied planners expected fierce resistance from German fighters once the invasion began. That resistance never truly came. The Luftwaffe launched attacks throughout the day, but only in limited numbers. American, British, and Canadian fighters dominated the skies. Among them, the P-47 Thunderbolt quickly assumed a role few people had imagined when the aircraft first entered service. It no longer existed solely to escort bombers. Now it became one of the most destructive ground attack aircraft in Europe. The transformation seemed almost inevitable. Everything that made the Thunderbolt difficult to destroy in aerial combat also made it exceptionally dangerous at low altitude. Its massive radial engine resisted battle damage. Its rugged construction absorbed punishment from anti-aircraft fire. Its powerful engine accelerated rapidly after attack runs. Its 850 caliber machine guns delivered tremendous firepower against vehicles, locomotives, troop concentrations, and aircraft parked on the ground. The Luftwaffe suddenly faced an enemy capable of attacking almost anything. American commanders quickly recognized this opportunity. With Allied fighters controlling much of the airspace over Normandy, escort missions became only one part of daily operations. After accompanying bombers or patrolling invasion beaches, Thunderbolt squadrons often received new assignments: search the roads, attack military traffic, destroy railway lines, strike bridges, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the front. These missions became known collectively as armed reconnaissance. Unlike carefully planned bombing raids against fixed targets, armed reconnaissance relied upon initiative. Pilots searched for enemy activity wherever they found it. Every road became a hunting ground. German commanders experienced the consequences almost immediately. Normandy's road network offered relatively few major routes capable of supporting large troop movements. Columns attempting daylight travel attracted immediate attention. Observers reported vehicles. Reconnaissance aircraft confirmed the sightings. Within minutes, formations of Thunderbolts often arrived overhead. The attacks followed a familiar pattern. Pilots descended rapidly from medium altitude. Machine guns opened fire first. Long streams of 50 caliber bullets swept across trucks, half-tracks, fuel tankers, and artillery tractors. If rockets accompanied the mission, they followed moments later. Bombs completed the attack before the fighters climbed sharply away. Even when individual vehicles survived, the convoy usually stopped moving. Drivers abandoned trucks. Soldiers scattered into nearby fields. Traffic jams developed rapidly. The psychological effect often exceeded the physical destruction. German veterans repeatedly described the fear created by Allied fighter bombers. Movement during daylight became increasingly dangerous. Officers delayed convoys until darkness whenever possible. Columns dispersed. Camouflage became essential. Travel slowed dramatically. The simple appearance of Thunderbolts overhead frequently halted entire formations before a single shot was fired. Fuel convoys suffered especially severe losses. Germany already struggled with growing fuel shortages. Every tank or truck destroyed represented more than immediate material loss. It deprived tanks, trucks, and aircraft farther ahead of desperately needed gasoline. The Luftwaffe felt these shortages directly. Aircraft required aviation fuel. Ground crews depended upon transportation. Replacement parts traveled by truck or rail. Every successful Thunderbolt attack weakened not only the army, but also Germany's air force. Railways became another favorite target. Steam locomotives proved surprisingly vulnerable. Machine gun fire damaged boilers, piping, control systems, and crew compartments. Bombs cratered tracks. Rockets destroyed freight cars loaded with ammunition or fuel. Repair crews worked continuously restoring damaged lines. Thunderbolt pilots returned repeatedly. The cycle rarely ended. German transportation officers later admitted that maintaining railway operations during daylight became extraordinarily difficult. Locomotive crews developed unusual habits. Whenever Allied fighters appeared, trains often stopped immediately. Engines hid beneath trees, inside tunnels, or beneath camouflage whenever possible. Schedules became almost meaningless. Everything depended upon the air situation. The Thunderbolt had effectively become an airborne roadblock stretching across occupied Europe. Its impact extended beyond transportation. German airfields increasingly came under attack, unlike strategic bombers striking factories from high altitude. Thunderbolts approached low and fast. Aircraft parked beside runways offered tempting targets. Fuel storage areas exploded spectacularly when hit. Maintenance workshops suffered repeated damage. Ground crews found themselves diving for cover before completing repairs. Pilots preparing for takeoff sometimes watched American fighters sweep across the airfield moments before engine start. The disruption proved constant. Every damaged runway delayed operations, every destroyed fuel truck reduced flying hours, every mechanic killed became another irreplaceable loss. Luftwaffe commanders attempted various countermeasures. Anti-aircraft guns multiplied around important installations. Camouflage improved. Aircraft dispersed instead of parking closely together. Decoy airfields appeared in several locations. Some succeeded temporarily. Experienced Thunderbolt pilots gradually learned to distinguish real targets from fake ones. Reconnaissance photographs also exposed many deception efforts. American intelligence continuously updated target information. The attacks continued. The P-47 also gained a new weapon during this period, unguided rockets, although accuracy varied considerably. Rockets delivered tremendous destructive power against hardened targets. German bunkers, bridges, railway locomotives, armored vehicles, even when rockets failed to score direct hits. Nearby explosions often disabled equipment or blocked transportation routes. Combined with bombs and machine guns, they transformed the Thunderbolt into one of the most heavily armed single-engine aircraft of the war. German armored units quickly discovered another unpleasant reality. Many believed tanks offered reasonable protection against fighter attacks. In practice, repeated airstrikes complicated every movement. A direct rocket hit might destroy even a heavy tank. Machine gun fire damaged optics, external equipment, fuel containers, antennas, and exposed crew members. More importantly, fighter attacks disrupted formations, columns scattered, commanders halted advances, repair vehicles struggled to reach damaged equipment. The constant interruption steadily reduced operational efficiency. Perhaps nowhere did the Thunderbolt's influence become more visible than during the German retreat following the breakout from Normandy after Operation Cobra shattered German defenses in late July 1944. Allied armored divisions advanced rapidly across France. Retreating German forces desperately attempted to withdraw equipment eastward. Roads filled with trucks, artillery, horse-drawn wagons, civilian refugees, and armored vehicles. The congestion created ideal conditions for Allied fighter bombers. Thunderbolt squadrons attacked repeatedly throughout the day. Pilots later recalled seeing roads stretching for kilometers, packed with vehicles unable to maneuver. Bombs created craters blocking traffic. Machine gun fire ignited fuel trucks. Secondary explosions spread confusion. Within minutes, orderly retreats often became chaotic traffic jams. The destruction reached its peak around the Falaise pocket. As German armies attempted escaping encirclement, thousands of vehicles crowded narrow escape routes. Allied artillery already covered many roads. Thunderbolts and other fighter bombers added continuous aerial attacks. Smoke rose from burning trucks, destroyed bridges forced additional congestion. Abandoned equipment accumulated rapidly. Many German soldiers later remembered the constant presence of Allied aircraft overhead more vividly than individual ground battles. One veteran remarked that daylight itself seemed to belong to the enemy. The Luftwaffe tried desperately to intervene. Fighter units continued flying whenever fuel and aircraft remained available. Experienced aces still achieved victories against Allied aircraft. The problem lay in numbers. German formations often encountered dozens of escort fighters protecting relatively small groups of Thunderbolts conducting ground attacks. Any attempt to engage risked immediate interception. Even successful German attacks rarely lasted long before additional Allied fighters arrived. American operational flexibility increased steadily. Thunderbolt groups rotated missions throughout the day. One squadron escorted bombers during the morning, another attacked transportation targets in the afternoon, others patrolled invasion beaches or provided close support to advancing ground forces. Maintenance crews prepared aircraft with remarkable efficiency. The same fighter might perform multiple sorties within 24 hours. German units found matching this operational tempo increasingly impossible. The Thunderbolt's ruggedness again proved invaluable. Ground attack exposed aircraft to intense anti-aircraft fire. Light flak weapons lined roads, railway stations, bridges, and troop concentrations. Hits became almost inevitable. Yet the Jug repeatedly survived damage that astonished both pilots and mechanics. Aircraft returned missing portions of wing surfaces. Control cables had been severed. Engines leaked oil from multiple bullet impacts. Entire sections of fuselage bore hundreds of holes. Ground crews patched the damage, replaced damaged components, and often returned the aircraft to service within days. The Luftwaffe noticed this frustrating pattern. Destroying a Thunderbolt completely required extraordinary punishment. Damaging it frequently proved insufficient. American pilot morale benefited enormously. Flying low over enemy territory demanded confidence. Pilots accepted considerable risk because they trusted their aircraft. Stories circulated constantly. One pilot landed after losing several cylinders. Another returned despite severe wing damage. Others survived direct anti-aircraft hits that appeared impossible. Whether every story remained entirely accurate mattered less than the overall effect. Thunderbolt crews believed their aircraft would bring them home. That confidence encouraged aggressive tactics. German pilots respected the aircraft accordingly. Post-war interviews reveal surprisingly consistent opinions. Many Luftwaffe veterans still preferred the handling qualities of the Bf-109 or Fw-190. Several believed those fighters remained more agile. Almost all acknowledged, however, that the Thunderbolt possessed exceptional durability. They also recognized America's overwhelming production capacity. Shooting down one aircraft rarely changed anything. Another soon appeared. Some German commanders concluded that defeating the Thunderbolt required destroying American industry itself. By 1944, that objective had become impossible. Factories in the United States operated safely beyond the reach of German bombers. New aircraft crossed the Atlantic continuously. Fresh pilots arrived regularly. Replacement engines, propellers, weapons, and spare parts accompanied them. The Luftwaffe increasingly fought an opponent capable of absorbing losses without slowing its operations. This realization proved deeply discouraging. By late summer 1944, the skies over Western Europe had changed beyond recognition. The Luftwaffe still launched determined missions, but it no longer controlled events. Instead, German commanders reacted constantly to Allied air activity. Thunderbolts escorted bombers, hunted fighters, strafed convoys, attacked railways, bombed bridges, destroyed airfields, and supported advancing ground troops. Their presence affected nearly every German movement during daylight hours. Yet, even as the P-47 reached the height of its effectiveness, another factor was quietly ensuring that the Luftwaffe could never regain the initiative. The greatest challenge facing Germany was no longer the Thunderbolt itself, but the collapse of the entire system needed to oppose it, its pilots, its fuel, its factories, and the experienced leadership that had once made the Luftwaffe one of the most feared air forces in the world. By the beginning of 1945, the Luftwaffe still existed as a fighting force, but it no longer resembled the air arm that had swept across Europe during the opening years of the war. In 1939 and 1940, German fighter pilots had entered combat backed by experienced leaders, carefully organized training programs, reliable fuel supplies, and an aircraft industry capable of meeting operational demands. 5 years later, much of that foundation had disappeared. The Allies had not defeated the Luftwaffe through a single decisive battle. Instead, they had steadily dismantled every element that allowed it to function. Against the background, the P-47 Thunderbolt became one of the aircraft that symbolized Germany's growing inability to defend its own skies. One of the greatest problems confronting German commanders was the loss of experienced pilots. Throughout the early years of the war, Luftwaffe fighter units had benefited from extraordinary combat experience. Many squadron leaders had fought in Spain before the Second World War. Others gained valuable experience over Poland, France, Britain, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. Their tactical knowledge made them formidable opponents. However, unlike the American system, Germany rarely removed successful fighter pilots from combat to become instructors. The reasoning seemed logical. Experienced men were desperately needed at the front. Every ace represented valuable combat power. The consequence gradually became devastating. When veteran pilots were killed, wounded, or captured, their experience disappeared with them. The next generation received instruction from increasingly inexperienced replacements. The United States followed a different philosophy. Many American fighter pilots completed combat tours before returning home to train new aviators. The lessons learned over Europe spread rapidly throughout the entire training system. New pilots arrived already familiar with enemy tactics, formation flying, radio discipline, gunnery techniques, and survival procedures developed through months of actual combat. The difference became increasingly visible during the final year of the war. Thunderbolt squadrons continued receiving well-trained replacements. German fighter groups often received young pilots who had never experienced aerial combat before arriving at the front. Fuel shortages made the situation even worse. Flying skill depends upon practice. Pilots cannot maintain proficiency while sitting on the ground. BY 1944. Germany faced a catastrophic aviation fuel crisis. Synthetic fuel plants became major targets of Allied bombing. Facilities producing high-octane aviation gasoline suffered repeated attacks. Romanian oil production, once Germany's principal natural source of petroleum, became increasingly unavailable. Every available liter of fuel received careful priority. Operational missions came first. Training suffered accordingly. Some German replacement pilots reached frontline units after receiving only a fraction of the flying hours considered normal earlier in the war. Veterans immediately recognized the danger. Their fighter aircraft represented only part of the weapon. The pilot mattered equally. The Thunderbolt benefited enormously from this imbalance. American pilots generally entered combat with extensive preparation and often flew alongside experienced squadron leaders. German newcomers frequently faced veteran Allied formations during their very first operational missions. The results were predictable. Losses increased steadily. The Luftwaffe also struggled with maintenance. Aircraft surviving combat often required extensive repairs. Replacement engines arrived slowly. Spare parts became increasingly scarce. Bomb damage disrupted production schedules. Transportation delays prevented equipment from reaching operational units. Ground crews displayed remarkable ingenuity. Damaged aircraft were cannibalized for usable components. Improvised repairs became common. Despite these efforts, serviceable aircraft gradually declined. American maintenance units experienced very different conditions. Replacement parts crossed the Atlantic in enormous quantities. Entire engines arrived ready for installation. New propellers, machine guns, radios, tires, and instruments remained readily available. Thunderbolt mechanics often restored heavily damaged aircraft with astonishing speed. A fighter returning from combat full of bullet holes frequently flew again within days. The Luftwaffe could not match that pace. Another decisive factor involved the destruction of German airfields. Throughout 1944 and 1945, Allied fighter bombers repeatedly attacked operational bases across occupied Europe and Germany itself. The P-47 participated extensively in these missions. Runways became cratered, fuel trucks exploded, maintenance hangars burned, communication systems failed. Aircraft waiting for takeoff suddenly found themselves under attack. Every damaged airfield complicated future operations. Pilots transferred repeatedly between temporary bases. Ground crews struggled to establish efficient maintenance under constantly changing conditions. Operational efficiency declined even before aircraft left the ground. The Thunderbolt's rugged construction again proved invaluable. Low-level attacks exposed pilots to intense anti-aircraft fire. Yet the P-47 consistently absorbed punishment that astonished friend and foe alike. Numerous wartime photographs show Thunderbolts returning with entire sections of wing missing, control surfaces shredded, engines damaged by shell fragments, fuselages covered with hundreds of holes. Many aircraft remained repairable despite damage that appeared fatal. This durability reduced effective American losses even when German anti-aircraft defenses achieved accurate hits. The aircraft itself inspired tremendous confidence. Pilots willingly accepted dangerous assignments because they trusted the Thunderbolt's ability to survive. That confidence translated directly into aggressive tactics. German troops noticed. Ground attack missions became increasingly relentless because American pilots believed they could endure heavy defensive fire and still return safely. This constant pressure further weakened German logistics. Supply columns moved almost exclusively at night. Railway traffic slowed dramatically. Fuel distribution became increasingly difficult. Ironically, these same shortages reduced Luftwaffe flying activity. The German Air Force found itself trapped within a vicious cycle. Less fuel meant fewer training flights. Fewer trained pilots meant greater combat losses. Greater losses demanded more replacement aircraft. Bombing reduced aircraft production. Reduced production weakened air defenses. Weaker defenses allowed additional bombing. Every element reinforced the next. The Thunderbolt operated within this strategic environment. IT did not defeat the Luftwaffe alone. Rather, it became one of several powerful instruments exploiting Germany's steadily worsening position. American industrial production deserves equal attention. During the war, Republic Aviation manufactured more than 15,000 P-47 Thunderbolts. The number itself reflected extraordinary industrial capacity. Factories operated around the clock. Assembly lines became increasingly efficient. Standardized components simplified production. Replacement aircraft crossed the Atlantic continuously. German intelligence understood these numbers. Reports repeatedly warned that American manufacturing exceeded anything Germany could realistically counter. Even successful combat victories failed to reduce Allied strength significantly. New aircraft simply replaced those lost. The psychological impact upon German fighter units proved considerable. Veteran pilots increasingly realized that individual tactical success no longer influenced the overall balance. One German ace might destroy several enemy aircraft during a mission. The following week, Allied formations appeared larger than before. Industrial production had transformed aerial warfare into a contest of endurance as much as skill. America possessed overwhelming advantages in that contest. The Thunderbolt also demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Originally designed primarily as a high-altitude interceptor, it evolved into one of the most effective fighter bombers of the European War. Its strong airframe carried bombs, rockets, and additional ammunition without compromising structural integrity. Few contemporary fighters performed such diverse missions equally well. Escort heavy bombers in the morning, attack railway yards during the afternoon, provide close air support before evening. The same aircraft accomplished all three. This flexibility complicated German planning enormously. Luftwaffe commanders never knew precisely where Thunderbolt formations might appear next. Military historians continue debating which Allied fighter exerted the greatest influence over Germany. The P-51 Mustang receives enormous attention because of its exceptional range. The British Spitfire became legendary during the Battle of Britain. The Soviet Il-2 earned fame as a ground attack aircraft. Each played indispensable roles. The Thunderbolt deserves equal recognition. Its contribution extended far beyond aerial victories. It escorted bombers during critical phases of the strategic bombing campaign. It fought experienced German fighters at high altitude. It attacked transportation networks. It destroyed locomotives, trucks, bridges, artillery positions, and fuel convoys. It provided close support to Allied armies advancing across Western Europe. Very few aircraft influenced so many aspects of the campaign simultaneously. German veterans themselves often acknowledged this after the war. Many continued believing the Messerschmitt Bf 109 or Focke-Wulf Fw 190 possessed superior maneuverability. Some argued that German fighters remained technically excellent throughout the conflict. Few questioned the Thunderbolt's durability. Even fewer questioned America's ability to replace losses. Several former Luftwaffe pilots remarked that destroying one Thunderbolt rarely mattered because another soon appeared. The real opponent was not merely the aircraft. It was the industrial system behind it. That observation perhaps explains the title of this story better than any technical comparison. The Luftwaffe certainly shot down P-47 Thunderbolts. American losses remained significant throughout the war. Hundreds of Thunderbolts never returned from combat. Many skilled American pilots lost their lives flying them. The aircraft was never invincible. Yet stopping the Thunderbolt required far more than winning isolated dogfights. Germany needed enough experienced pilots to challenge every escort mission, enough aviation fuel to sustain continuous operations, enough factories to replace losses, enough transportation to deliver aircraft and spare parts, enough secure airfields from which to operate. By 1944 and 1945, the Luftwaffe lacked nearly all of those requirements. The Thunderbolt exploited every weakness. Its rugged design reduced losses. Its powerful engine dominated high-altitude combat. Its 8 machine guns delivered devastating firepower. Its ability to carry bombs and rockets expanded its usefulness far beyond escort duties. Its pilots benefited from extensive training and abundant fuel. Its mechanics enjoyed reliable supplies of spare parts. Behind every Thunderbolt stood an industrial giant operating thousands of kilometers beyond German reach. When historians examine why the Luftwaffe failed to regain control of the skies over Europe, they usually point towards several interconnected causes, rather than a single decisive factor. Strategic bombing crippled German industry. Fuel shortages reduced pilot training and flying operations. Experienced airmen disappeared faster than they could be replaced. American production overwhelmed every attempt to reduce Allied strength. Within that larger story, the P-47 Thunderbolt emerged as one of the most effective expressions of Allied air power. It survived damage that destroyed other fighters, escorted bombers ever deeper into Germany, devastated transportation networks after D-Day, and relentlessly attacked the logistical system upon which the Luftwaffe depended. In the end, the Luftwaffe could not stop the P-47 Thunderbolt, because it was never fighting only the aircraft itself. It was fighting the factories that built it, the engineers who continually improved it, the mechanics who kept it flying, the pilots trained by veterans, the tankers carrying unlimited aviation fuel across the Atlantic, and an Allied war economy that grew stronger while Germany steadily collapsed. Every Thunderbolt appearing over Europe represented far more than one fighter. It represented an entire nation capable of replacing every loss, sustaining every offensive, and maintaining relentless pressure until Germany's once feared air force could no longer contest control of the skies. The Thunderbolt did not win the air war alone, but it became one of the strongest reasons why. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe had lost the ability to stop the Allies from flying wherever they wished over Europe.